Turning now to the webinar topic this morning, we have Norm Baillie-David, TalentMap's Senior Vice President of Engagement and our subject matter expert. Norm is going to be leading the presentation this morning along with a panel of millennials to address the topic of engaging millennials. Norm has worked with a variety of companies from small to large, both in the public and the private sector, and he lends his expertise to those organizations in helping them to interpret data and develop impactful action plans. We frequently come across this issue in our consultations with clients and HR professionals, and we hope today to dispel some of the myths around in millennials and engagement, and also to help uncover some of the facts based on the research that we've done, and as well based on the conversation that we're going to have today with the millennials on our panel. So just to look at our agenda, we are going to be covering off, spending about 5 minutes just discussing some of the common generalizations around millennials. 10 minutes will be allocated to look at some of the myths and facts based on our research, and then we'll open up the panel discussion for about 15 minutes and then wind up with a discussion around the implications for engaging millennials. At the end, we'll reserve about 10 minutes for your questions. So next slide, I'm just going to focus on a couple of slides here just to give you an idea of who TalentMap is and what we do. So our organization has been in business for well over 15 years. Our sole focus is on workforce engagement measurement, primarily employee engagement surveys, as well as onboarding and exit. We also do specialty workplace surveys around work-life pulse, safety surveys, and 360 leadership surveys, and so on. So this is our primary focus. We have thousands of employee engagement surveys under our belt since inception. We have surveyed millions of employees, and annually we do more than 500 employee engagement surveys. Just to give you a sense of the clients that we work with, and the screen is freezing a little bit, so we'll just sort of wait for that to refresh. There it is. Some of the clients that we work with include technology and engineering, a lot of knowledge-based clients, health services, not-for-profit, government, financial services, and industry sector clients, including manufacturing, oil and gas, as well as construction. So we do have a wide range of experience that goes from organizations of 50 employees all the way up to 100,000 plus. We also do work in awards programs like Canada's Top 100, Employee Choice Awards in Ottawa, and so on. And these programs, of course, enable us to do a lot of research in a very, very large normative database. So on that note, I'm going to turn the mic over to Norm, and I'll let him get started.
Well, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to those of you in Eastern Canada and Central Canada. Hopefully, those of us in the East are able to keep warm on this very, very chilly day in this very chilly month of February, and we're all jealous of you out west, where it's not so cold. Let me basically introduce the topic to you today and give you a little bit of example of some understanding in terms of where this came from and where this germinated. If any of you, I mean, basically, if you're alive and working in HR these days, you cannot help but see just the tons of research that's coming out, the tons of blogs and articles and writing that's coming out just talking about the millennials and the millennial generation. I just opened my LinkedIn account this morning, and no fewer than 5 different articles are coming out on, around the millennials. And it really, really is. It's a hot topic. It's something that's being discussed a lot, and we see that, and I see that in particular when I'm presenting to our clients in terms of engagement results, in conducting workshops in terms of how to improve engagement. And essentially, what we're seeing is a lot of frustration, if not exasperation and bewilderment at essentially what can be described very, very easily as a little bit of a culture clash. A culture clash because most folks sitting in the boardrooms, the executive leadership teams, and even in the HR departments tend to be from my generation or maybe Gen X. My generation happens to be the baby boomers or Gen X. And the millennials come along who are Gen Y and essentially are quite different in many respects, but they're also very similar in many respects. So as we explain and talk about different cultures, any different cultures, whether they be ethnicity or whatever, we tend to focus on the differences, and we forget how similar we might be in some ways. So what I want to do today is actually I want to have a little fun with you. I'm going to run down some of our research. We've done research which basically what I'll show you with almost 100,000 employees, of which the representative number will be of the millennial generation, and I'll break down those numbers in a couple of slides. And I really wanted to contrast what we hear in the leadership rooms and in the boardrooms in terms of some of the generalizations about millennials with the facts. The facts really coming from very, very robust research that comes from our own many surveys, as Monica pointed out. So let's get this started here. So basically, we have to start with a definition. There are many out there. I think everybody knows, or roughly, who the millennials are referring to. We're referring to. I think it's really important to point out that the millennials aren't a demographic group. They are a generational cohort. What's the difference? A demographic group is defined by year of birth, but a generational cohort is defined through life experience. And basically, when we look at all the definitions, the generation cohort is simply the Gen Ys, or the generation that's coming after the Gen X's. We can basically say that, roughly speaking, the millennials whom we're referring to are born from the early 80s through the late 90s, but you can see this is not hard and fast rules. It really depends on the experiences. And I think really what captures, defines, and helps us explain a lot of what are some of the attitudes that this group, this cohort possesses, is if we understand some of the life-shaping influences that these folks have gone through. So remember, most were born either shortly after, during or shortly after the 1980s recession. They witnessed the 1990s recession. They're very much part of the dot-com crash. So they've seen a lot of economic turbulence, and they've seen their parents go through that economic turbulence. And that really has conditioned a lot of the attitudes we see. This is the first generation that has not known life without computers and the internet. And of course, we know, and as we'll see, that can obviously explain one of the reasons, or one of the generalizations I'm going to talk about being tech savvy. And of course, they were the earliest adopters of social media early in the early 2000s. One of the things that really a bit of a generalization here, but is really key to understanding a lot of the collaborative spirit and a lot of the respect or lack thereof of hierarchy, the way and depending on how we want to look at it, is remember, and I can remember this with my kids, essentially competition was frowned on in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, and if you brought your kids to soccer practice in those years, it was a medal for everyone. And we were trying to basically even out the playing field for fear of, to make sure self-esteem was built up, no hurt feelings, etc. And this basically, some of these influences now have conditioned the culture that we see today in the millennial group. So I think really the way we have to look at this is we have to look at this in terms of really two fundamental perspectives. And I found this interesting infographic that really shows the difference between what we as HR professionals and how we describe millennials and generalize about them versus research in terms of how millennials describe themselves. And you can see some huge contrasts here. We tend to think of HR we as HR professionals tend to think of millennials as people savvy, tech savvy, loyal, not so much, fun-loving, yes, and hard-working, maybe not so much. When we contrast that to the way millennials describe themselves, we're seeing some huge differences. Look in terms of the tech savvy. I even mentioned it, and I generalized based on by some of my own experiences and my kids' abilities. Essentially, I'm one of those people that thinks, millennials tend to be tech savvy. Only a third of millennials describe themselves as such. Loyalty is another one. Loyal to their employers, we don't think so as HR professionals. And boomers of the older generations, they do. So right away we start to see the basis of a culture clash that's starting to happen in terms of how we describe a particular generational cohort versus how they describe themselves. So that obviously you can see how that was going to lead up to some of the frustration and the exasperation that we're talking about. Just some of the common generalizations, I've already started to refer to them in terms of what I hear in the boardroom when we're talking about this generational culture. Well, I already mentioned tech savvy. We often hear, very often as a matter of fact, we hear, they expect to be in the boardroom in the corner office in 18 months. They don't respect hierarchy. In other words, they have no problems beelining to the president's office or the VP's office to have their views heard. They need high amounts of feedback and recognition is another thing that we hear a lot of. They need work-life balance. They're not willing to pay their dues. They tend to be disloyal, ready to jump at the first opportunity. And as I'm speaking, those of you who may be in the generational cohort that I'm talking about, especially my panelists in the other room next door, are probably starting to bristle a little bit because you can see as these generalizations start to pile up, how we begin to paint this picture, which is essentially stereotypical in general, these adverse generalizations that tend to lead us down the path of making a lot of faulty assumptions in our management style and how we deal with these people as individuals. So what I want to do with you folks now is basically play a little bit of a game. So if you see in your bar on the right-hand side, you should see a section called polls. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw you a question out there, and you're going to actually, this is a little bit of a pop quiz. You'll be able to answer the poll and selecting whether or not you think the statement is a myth or a fact in terms of generalizing about millennials. And after that, we're going to open it up to our panel and throw a number of questions their way and really hopefully get a little bit of a discussion going. And of course, throughout all this, if you have questions that you would like to pose to either myself or our panelists, feel free to jot them in the questions box, and we'll take them a little bit later on in the session. So first of all, I want to just identify where are we getting our quote-unquote facts from. This is based on our database, our benchmark database, that is a rolling 5-year Canadian base of respondents. There's over roughly 500 organizations a year participate in this. We have almost 100,000 total respondents in that database. 28,000 plus are aged less than 35, so at least from the age perspective can be considered as part of the millennial cohort. And then, of course, as I said, the last 5 years in Canada. So what we're going to do is we're going to contrast each statement by whether or not how the people below age 35 and above age 35 tend to think of these specific attitudes. So here we go with the first one. So more millennials are looking for or thinking of accepting a job with another employer. So we've talked a lot about the generalization that millennials tend to be disloyal. What I want to know from you, I'm going to put this poll up here. Okay. You folks can now vote and click if you think this is myth or if you think this is fact. All right, so I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. I see the numbers are coming in. Numbers are coming in fast. Excellent. We're at 57. 63% have now cast a vote. 75. We're almost there. Come on, a few more. Few more. Let's see. 86%. 88. Give you another 2 or 3 seconds to cast your vote. All right. It's slowing down. It's slowing down. All right. I think that's about it. That's what we're going to get. So let's cut that off. And I don't know if you can see the results, but 57% of you think this is a myth. 43% of you think that this is a fact. In fact, the answer is, if I can yeah, there you go. It's actually a fact. So when we look at the percentage of those who agree or strongly agree with the statement, I'm looking for or thinking of accepting a job with another employer, 29% of millennials agree to that versus only 21% of those age 35% more, age 35 or higher. So almost 10%, 8% here, and that's a very, very high number in our database, they have their eye on the market a little bit more than everybody else. So this is actually a fact. Does that mean that they're disloyal? I don't know if I can make that conclusion. But what I can say is we have to be cognizant of the fact that the millennial generation, those under 35, are a lot more attuned to what's going out there in the marketplace. So this looks like it was a little bit of fun here. So let's do the second one. Basically, I'm going to show you the second one is millennials feel they have too much work. We've heard a lot about the myths or the facts, whether or not the generalizations anyway, that work-life balance is very, very important. Do millennials feel they have too much work? So this number here, 65% agree or strongly agree that the amount of work is about right. Is that more or less? Is it myth or fact compared to everybody else? Time to vote, folks. We're at 75%, 82, 84, 5. Ooh, this is a close one. 88, 89. All right, at 89%. So we're split right down the middle here on this one. 49% of you think this is a myth. 51% of you think this is a fact. And in actual fact, it is a myth. 65% of millennials feel that the amount of work required of them is about right versus only 61% of everybody else. So the fact that if we want to look at work-life balance, the amount of work isn't necessarily the issue. Some of the other research that I'm not presenting here today actually shows that millennials have a greater sense of balance and impose that balance in terms of them. They make sure that it happens for them. But the amount of work, more millennials actually think the amount of work asked of them is correct. So the work-life balance issue has to be seen as a little bit different than we tend to generalize. Let's go to the next one. We always hear about millennials wanting to be in the corner office, thinking that they can do a better job. So here's a statement. Fewer millennials have confidence in senior leadership. So 68% have trust and confidence in senior leadership's ability. Is that more or less? Is this myth or fact that fewer millennials have confidence in senior leadership? Time to vote. I find it quite interesting in terms of the dichotomy of opinion here. I was thinking we'd be having more consensus around one side or the other, but the fact that we're split on this more or less is quite telling. We are at 80%, 81, 82, slowing down. Okay, at 85, we'll close that. 57% of you think that's a myth. 43% of you think that's a fact. And it's a myth. More millennials have confidence in their senior leadership than everybody else. So the fact that even though that millennials want, that they say that they want, or we have generalized the fact that they want to be in the corner office, more millennials, more younger people actually have confidence in their senior leadership. Quite interesting. So we've got 2 more to go. Let's look at the next one. Fewer millennials find their work challenging. Myth or fact? Time to vote. Fewer millennials find their work challenging. 65% of them agree their work is challenging. Is that fewer or more than everybody else? That's 70% voted. $73. 76. Give it 5 more seconds. Okay, so 55% of you think that's a myth. 45% of you think that's a fact. And in actual fact, it's a big fact. This is the area where we see one of the greatest differences in between millennials and the older generations. And you can see there's 12 percentage points difference here, which, as you know, in large statistical terms, is a huge difference. Now, we've been talking about professional growth a lot with our clients and the challenges of keeping millennials engaged in an environment where there are limited career prospects. And as we saw, millennials do have, or more millennials do have an eye on the street, more so than everybody else. But the reason tends not necessarily to be that their career aspirations can't be met. We actually found that that was equal to everybody else. The challenge is actually keeping these folks engaged by providing challenging, meaningful work. In actual fact, what we see in the research, and we'll hear from our millennials shortly, is that it's all about making a difference. It's about making a contribution. And this one here is in a big way, and I think this is probably one of the key things that I'm hoping that everybody here will take from this presentation. It's all about interesting and challenging work, and less necessarily about questioning the leadership or feeling career aspirations can't necessarily be met. So let's close this out. We've got one more. Overall, fewer millennials are engaged employees. Myth or fact? Fewer millennials are engaged employees. We've got 73, 75, 77, 79% voted, 81. And more of you are taking a risk on this one, I can see. And I can also see here, before I close this, okay, 68% feel it's a myth, 32% it's a fact, so we've actually got a clear majority on this one, and the majority would be right. The actual level of engagement is identical between millennials and everybody else. So there is a myth in terms of it is challenging, more challenging to engage millennials perhaps on those dimensions that I spoke about, but the actual level of engagement is identical to everybody else. So we can no longer assume that millennials are less engaged. That's just not borne out by the facts here. So what I'd like to do, essentially just to summarize this up, and then we're going to we're going to open it up to our panel and throw a few questions their way. The facts don't lie. Millennials are just as engaged as everybody else. They trust and respect the senior leadership equally. They buy into the vision of the organization as much. One didn't show you today, where we talked about performance and feedback and recognition. That's also a myth. Millennials are equally satisfied with their performance feedback. The major difference between millennials and the rest of us, us older age cohorts, it's about challenging work and maximizing their potential. So what I'm going to do now, bear with me for the technology, I'm going to unmute, and I hope everybody else is going to stay on mute. I'm going to unmute the line here for our panelists. While they're coming over, let me just introduce them. We have 3 graduate students from the Algonquin College Marketing and Research and Business Intelligence program. We have Lauren Perron, who's a graduate student and has also worked in a number of organizations and does have work experience. Mahendra Rawat is from India and has worked in one of our major competitors, as a matter of fact, while in India. And we have Liesl Douglas, who's also a graduate student at Algonquin. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is throw the first question out, and that is, folks, what are your expectations from an employer? And you'll have to come and speak close to the mic here. Liesl, you're going to start us off?
I'm going to start. Yes,
Okay.
I will start. So, well, one of the first things that I thought of was that I understand that I am part of a generational cohort, but I think that it's a good idea for employers to sort of see me as an individual who has her own wants and needs, and you know, I guess meet me halfway, interact with me in terms of what does Liesl want and what does Liesl need. I think that it could possibly be a disservice to generalize about my behavior in the workplace and what that means. I also would like my employers to notice my potential, and I don't necessarily expect to be rewarded in a tangible way in terms of an office or anything like that, but more mentorship and guidance and things like that. Also, in terms of entering the office environment, just being told, you know, how things actually work, because you know, shifting from different environments, things are done differently, especially if you come from an academic background into the world of work. I think that there's an assumption that things just directly translate, and sometimes they don't. So there's always that sort of period where you need to adjust, and I think that that could be better facilitated. And just variety and challenge in work tasks.
Okay. Anybody else? Mahendra?
Yeah, sure, I'll pitch in. So most of it is about building a two-way relationship where employer and employee have both a forum where they can speak out and can lay out their expectation from each other. So I probably would expect a work environment where I'm heard of and where I've been given chance to be part of projects where I enhance my skill set and learn from the job itself, and also I should be given opportunity to add some skill set which might not be part of my current role, but which might need in my near future. So I think learning and development would be a great requirement, and this is what I'll expect from my employer. And also there should be a proper work-life balance where I understand during initial stage of career you have to put in a lot of effort, but still it is expected from an employer to sort of maintain the work-life balance for employees.
Yeah, and I think going off of what both Liesl and Mahendra said, like it's definitely about that balance and coming in, and you know, some of us may have experience in the workforce and some of us may be new, so it's sort of like a balance between meeting the needs of our current role and then also knowing that we want to grow in those roles and like Liesl said, having mentorship opportunities or any learning developmental opportunities that we can get is great for us to move forward.
Okay. Here's a question I'm sure that a lot of people on the line are going to take some interest in. What do you think HR departments are doing right, and what do you think that they're doing wrong? So, Mahendra, why don't you start us off on this one?
Okay, sure. So first and foremost thing that would be that they're taking part in this webinar, which is all about millennials, and which is a great thing for us people that employ are really interested in understanding our concerns and how do we think and what are the pain points where they can actually they can fix those pain points so that millennials, which is going to be the biggest workforce in the future, like they know about their pain point and then can resolve them. And this is one of the good things that they are ready to address this situation right now. And when because now there are students who are currently pursuing their education, they're going out to look for jobs. So I think it's a great time for employers to actually look and do more research. What are they expecting, and how they can actually be part of the future, future workforce.
Lauren?
I think for me, like I can speak from my personal experiences. Some of the barriers that I came across were that sometimes in HR policy. So if I came in working for an organization and say I was only there on contract, I sometimes wouldn't qualify for training or learning and development, or I often had to go through quite a process to be able to take some sort of training. So I guess maybe be more open in your policies for people who are new employees, or in terms of like benefits for those employees if they qualify for taking training, or if they're permanent versus contract workers. I think that's important to consider as well.
Liesl, to add?
Yeah, just to add, I would say that I was talking about meeting millennials halfway earlier, and I think that millennial engagement is not just the responsibility of the millennial. I think that it's like Mahendra said earlier, it's a relationship. So, I've applied and I'm working for you and you've hired me, and now also I think it's part of the employer's responsibility to help me want to stay. And so I think engagement is a two-way relationship, and I think also just there's talk of hierarchy and not really respecting hierarchy. I think that sometimes, again, switching environments, if you've also just come out of academia, you're used to working for yourself, or you're not used to a certain structure. You probably just don't know how to operate in that environment, and I think that employers just need to talk more and train more and help millennials adjust more and know how to make their skills more applicable in the workplace.
Lauren, you have another thing to add?
So I just thought of something, a conversation I had with another person that I work with. And as part of the organization he works for, he was given like an annual employee review, and he was one of the few employees that was ranked very highly in the organization. And as a reward for that, he was invited to speak with one of the vice presidents of the organization to say, what he does in his work, how he found that successful. And I just thought that was a great way to really keep your employees engaged, and especially that if this employee is very young, I thought that was a great opportunity for him, and it would definitely make myself or I know made him feel highly engaged and proud of his work. And I think that's a good way to retain, or that would increase loyalty for sure.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions coming in from the audience. So rather than keep on my agenda, I'm going to, the first one is, could she, so that's one of you, Liesl or Lauren, come closer to the speaker? So I'm going to stand up because I can project a little bit better. And maybe one of you want to take the chair. And the first question here, is there any difference in what millennials are wanting with regard to employee benefits, health, dental, etc.?
Is there any difference?
Is there any difference in what millennials are wanting with regards to employee benefits?
I think I would want the same thing as what everybody else wants. I don't have ridiculous expectations for that.
I agree. I think, yeah, I agree. What's reasonable for a human being?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think I have any special expectations that would be different from someone that was older generation.
Yeah, I had employee benefits at my previous organization that I didn't get it right away, but I earned it after a period of time, and I was happy with it. And it was just a standard, I think, across the board, whatever those benefits are, and I never felt anything bad about it.
Okay. Mahendra, any?
No, I think it's pretty much like I don't have any high expectations. It's going to be same whatever is there as per the industry standard. I'm not really expecting anything which is not there. So yeah.
Okay, the next question here, I'm going to try and make this a little bit bigger. Whoops, I went and lost it. Yep, got it here. So, do millennials differ across industries, say white collar versus blue? What would you say about that?
I don't know. I don't know how to.
They could be across the industry, as in it doesn't matter. Like if somebody is passing out of Harvard, he might belong to a millennial generation, but he might be more likely to taking a position where he is doing some leadership. So I don't think that there's any difference.
Okay. What types of training opportunities do millennials find the most beneficial?
I can speak for myself, like any kind of training opportunity that would bring me up to the skill set of the senior people that I work with would be great. Like, so for example, like some sort of training in project management, presentation skills, language training was really important for me in my previous organization, being able to take that. Really anything, I would have taken any opportunity to train further.
I think it depends on what my skill set already is and what my job entails. So basically anything outside of what I don't already know how to do really well. I think for me, I work more in an analytical environment. So basically anything that brings in new and innovative ideas that would help me to do my job better in terms of analysis or writing or those things. So and
I think mentorship and like job shadowing is a really strong component of that too. Yeah, workshops.
And I think preparing your talent for the future is more important. Where you like what role they're gonna be in next 2 years, or what is industry is expecting the changes, like new softwares are coming in for your work. You should keep on updating your employees so that they can be ready to. They shouldn't be outdated with the technology or with another software and everything which is going to be used in your daily work.
Okay. The next one here, let me read it. It's a little lengthy. So if given the choice between a salary increase or above average benefit program, it says what would a millennial typically choose, but also what would you typically choose between a salary increase or above average benefit program? So that's the first part of this question. I'll split it into 2 parts. Salary increase versus above average benefits.
Well, if we have average benefits, I'd be happy with that, so I guess I would choose salary.
All right.
I'm thinking there are a lot of factors that I would have to be considering in depending on the job. But I think I agree with Lauren that I would just, I'm assuming average benefits would be, I would be happy with that. So then the extra money would definitely, I could do more with I could do whatever I want with that, you know. So yeah, I would go with the one.
And I'll go with Lizel and Lauren.
All right, salary wins. Here's the second part of the question. I work at a university and have students as our employees. How do you suggest that the employer make it a two-way street if the employee seems to want to have it all? Minimal work versus perceived old rewards from the employer.
Well, I think that's a bit of a unique situation because it sounds like if
Yeah, I
they're
don't think he's
students,
generalizing. He's got it
yeah,
in
if
mind.
they're students as employees, then that means they're in school, so they're going to need to work part-time. Whose employees seems to want it all, minimal.
Yeah.
What is the question?
I work. Okay. How do you suggest that the employer make it a two-way street if the employee seems to want to have it all, i.e. minimal work versus perceived old rewards?
I guess maybe like have a conversation with, I think that's the most important thing is have a conversation with that employee or student and find out what it is that will make a balance between the two. I mean, if you're already accommodating, I mean, as a student, I would be happy with an employer that accommodates my student schedule, and also it's important to acknowledge what I'm in school for, because that's unfortunate if you're attending school and you're learning all these skills, but your employer is not willing to recognize those skills and you want to move forward. I mean, it'd be nice if they complemented each other. Okay.
On the salary note, what is more important, higher salary or flexible work hours?
I think there should be a balance of both. It's not that one wants to work day and night and is like getting a good salary, but there should be a balance of both, like a normal salary, decent salary, plus a work-life balance. To both are required, I think.
Yeah.
I think the question really is, I know where this is coming from. So if you were offered two jobs, one is you're going to be basically working very hard, 60, 70 hours a week, but you're going to make a lot more money, or the other one you're going to make an average salary, but you work a normal work week. Which would you choose for? And that's an individual choice, so you each have a...
I think, it's an individual choice, and I think it depends on the stage of your life you're in, right? I mean, right now we're starting out, so I guess most of us don't have families yet, none of us do. So I guess the job where you'd be working harder and getting paid more would make sense. But I'm not looking at it from a salary perspective. I'm looking at it from this is the time when I can devote myself to my career.
Okay.
For me, if I really am invested in the work and I really like what I'm doing, I'm enjoying it, I work really, really hard regardless of the salary, so I'm not sure that the salary is going to be much of a, I mean, obviously, I don't want to be paid really, like a really poor salary, but I mean, I'm not sure that that's going to be a factor where I'm, thinking about time that I'm spending. That's me personally.
I think the more factor, it's just about whether I'm challenged or engaged in both of them. Like, that's what I think about. Like, I've had the job where I've had flexible hours and a good salary, but I wasn't engaged. So
Yeah, it more comes down to the point that you're working in your area of interest. So if your work is really exciting and it excites you and it is challenging for you, you will be ready to work hard. And I think salary would not matter. It's more about learning, because in an initial stage of your career, you want to have as many skill set as you can, or as many skill set as you can learn So I think it's more about keeping your skills up to date and getting more training. So I think if this work environment is my area of interest, I would be willing to work hard.
Okay. Connected to the benefits question now, what about flexible benefits like working from home? Would that influence you to stay or to move to another company? Is that an attractive benefit? Like working from home?
Yeah, that's an attractive benefit. I think all benefits probably attract us as benefits.
Yes, I think it is an attractive benefit. I don't think that necessarily would pull me from one company to another necessarily.
No.
There are a lot of other things, a lot of other factors I would consider about the job that would just be like a cherry on top.
Yes, I agree. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're running out of time, so we're going to take two more questions quickly here. While millennial employees seem to want more challenging work, my experience has been that millennial employees want to wait to be told what to do rather than taking the initiative. Any advice on how employers can encourage a more proactive approach to work assignments / projects and more creative input from millennial staff?
I think the major thing is communication. I think sometimes people don't know, especially if they've come into a new environment, they're not actually sure how engaged they are being. Because I've noticed that even working with other people in a group environment, sometimes they're not aware how much they're actually contributing or not. And I think
or whether it's wanted.
Yeah, or whether it's wanted. And I think that instead of making an assumption that, oh, they're not engaged and they don't want to be engaged, perhaps broach a discussion where, you know,
ask their opinion.
Yeah, it seems as though you're not engaged. You know, why, or why haven't you been doing this? And perhaps you might get, oh, I didn't realize that, you know, I wasn't being as engaged as I should have been, or I wasn't taking as much initiative as I should have been.
And there's something I can think of from my experience too. I always try to take initiative in my workplace and join different kind of like working group teams or anything that I could get to either network with other people in my organization or make myself known. And that wasn't necessarily something that was just given to me from my manager. And this is what I'm thinking of. I can think of a time when I wanted to be a part of a committee at the organization I worked with. And it wasn't just a matter of me saying, oh, I want to be a part of this. No one else is stepping forward. I had to, you know, make a case for myself of why I should be considered and why I was going to be able to balance it in my work. So I think that's an example of it, not just, and I was happy to do that because it makes me feel like I earned that role versus what the misconception that we think we're entitled to these opportunities. Like we're more than happy to make a case for ourselves of why we should have them.
Okay. How do you engage millennials while maintaining equity amongst the rest of the organization?
I think that everything you're doing to engage a millennial should be for every employee. And again, like I can speak to another organization I worked for where I kind of was a part of this for the whole organization of how to engage everyone. And it wasn't just the feelings of the younger generations at that organization. Most people felt that way. You know, everybody wants to be engaged in their job.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Oh, we got that one already. Does providing training and education create a sense of loyalty among millennials towards their employers? So if you get training and education, are you more loyal to the employer as a result?
I think so, because I think that signifies investment and that you really do think that I belong where it belong with the company, and that you're maximizing my potential. So you're facilitating my growth, and at the end of the day, it's an investment, and that definitely makes me feel that, oh, you know, loyal to the company and its vision and, you know, mission moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
All right, my last point, and then we're going to have to move on.
So yeah, I think it's important that. What was the question?
Does training and education require loyalty?
Yeah, it is important. I think if you've been trained on something, it becomes your liability to at least deliver the business in the same field because you've been trained for that thing. So I think it is important.
Okay. Last question here. I'm just going to see. Put back to ours here. How can organizations keep you engaged, especially if there's few opportunities for promotion?
Okay, I'll take this first. So it's not always about promotion. It's more about creating a work environment where which is inclusive in nature, which means you are being heard, like everyone is being heard of, and whatever they say, like their opinions matter to the organization. So it's not always about promotion, it's about a balance of everything. If you are being given opportunities where you can maximize your potential, so it's not always for the position or title. So it's more about that work environment. If you are engaged, you're going to stay there for longer. It matters in the end, but still it is debatable where like promotion is not the ultimate thing. to keep an employee engaged.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, and I think even small companies, there might not be room for that. Like, and where there are fewer employees, each employee ends up with a lot of responsibilities outside of their role anyway. And I feel also that if I'm given enough responsibility that I can probably implement new ideas that I have, at a certain point, I think that would also make me feel engaged, even though I'm not being promoted.
All right. Last word?
And I think we touched on a lot of that too, is just even if you can't be promoted in your role, rewards can also go like horizontally too, just in terms of expanding your experience or the role, like jumping into different projects, like just being involved more across the spectrum of your work.
Okay. Thank you all. I think this is really informative. Judging by the onslaught of the questions, obviously you created some interest out there in cyberspace. So I'm going to just take back my chair, if you don't mind, and try to make some sense out of this conversation. So what are the implications about what have we heard, and really what does that mean for us moving forward? I think that's probably what everybody needs to hear online. And I think the first misnomer that we've got around the whole loyalty and promotion issue and career aspirations, as Mahinder said, it's not necessarily about the promotion itself. In actual fact, what we also see in our research and in our experience with our clients is that there's just not enough promotions to go around for all the talent that the millennial generation is bringing in. So what do? Well, we need to challenge them. We need to let them have an impact and make a difference. Seek their input, I think, is really something that everybody's talking about. Provide lots of opportunities to collaborate, whether that's collaborating at a horizontal level or even what we would call diagonal, so with higher levels as well. The best practice is really to involve them in decision making. If not, one thing that's very different from our generation as boomers and less so for the Xers is right now, because the millennial generation has had that internet access and computer access all of their life, they've got a very, very healthy sense of skepticism. We see that in terms of how they deal with advertising, and the same thing is true in terms of how they deal with why decisions are made. So it's very, very important to be transparent and explain. If they can't have input into the decision making, at least tell them why. Finally, the last 2 points I'd like to make is it's like working with any other culture, whether it's an ethnicity or racial culture or any other culture. What we're talking about is generalizations. And what Liesl aptly pointed out right at the beginning of the panel is treat them as individuals. Don't make the assumption, and even through some of your questioning, you were making certain assumptions about individual cases of non-performance, that this was a millennial issue as opposed to an individual issue. Treat them as individuals first. Hopefully we've given you some insight, and there's plenty of insight and research available online in terms of generalizing the cohort per se. That gives us some guidance, but it's like telling, it's like trying to find some place in Nunavut by saying go north. It's not really enough. You need to basically find out exactly what the person is all about. Treat them as individuals, and the final point is, like our esteemed panel has said, engage them just like everybody else. Most of the things that we're talking about apply across the board. So yes, there are some differences. We pointed them out, factual differences, but at the same time, treat them as individuals, treat them like everybody else. On that note, I'm going to turn things back over to Monica, who will just give us a little primer as to where you can spot TalentMap across the country in the coming weeks and months, and then we will be closing. So Monica, if you would please. Oh, I guess we've lost Monica, so I'll walk you through it. We're going to have a number. We do a monthly webinar. There's going to be another one in terms of not-for-profit on March 3rd, another one in terms of looking at employee engagement, maintaining the momentum on the 26th. We will be speaking and exhibiting at the HRIA annual conference in Edmonton in April. And finally, we're doing something new. We're working hand in hand with the Conference Board of Canada. The Conference Board is looking at our, using our database, which we talked about a little bit, to really understand what it is now we know 10 years on in terms of the field of employee engagement. We're going to be doing a presentation and some workshops in Calgary on the 25th of May. So on that note, everybody, I want to thank you immensely. I see that there was another question, a factual question. Yes, the copy of the presentation will be sent to all participants. So fear not on that respect. We will be in touch with you on that. Once again, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Mahinder. Thank you, Liesl, for your contributions. I'm sure they were well valued. And thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Numbers, things that are actionable and are going to contribute to the bottom line. So what I'd like to cover off over the next several slides is a bit about employee engagement. So what is it exactly? Why is it important? Provide some data around